Welcome to the XJO podcast. Here we explore journalism innovation, including the way academics are sharing their research in new ways that target a wider audience. This podcast showcases some of the researchers on the XJO team. I'm Saman Amatullah, and I'm an RA with XJO. Joining me now is Hanako Smith, a PhD candidate in the Communication and Culture program at York University and X University, and a researcher for XJO. Thank you for being here, Hannah.
Thanks, Sama. Thanks for having me.
So how do you define explanatory journalism? It's a topic whose scope is really wide and can be produced and consumed differently by different people. So what's your definition?
Well, my definition is probably it's just actually very heavily informed by this project. Just as the project manager, I was working with other RAs to get our website launched and to have our about section written. So we had a very standard explanatory journalism sort of definition, which is essentially articles, I suppose, that are journalistic in style, but are written by academics and specifically about topics that they are researching themselves and have field experience and or peer-reviewed experience looking into.
How has your work, you've done a lot of work in communications, studied a lot of communications. How do you think your work has informed the project, and how does this concept inform your work?
Yeah, I've TA'd teaching. I've been a teaching assistant for politics, policy, and the media quite a lot. And we look a lot at misinformation at the latter end of that that class. We finally get up to current day and we look at topics like misinformation and kind of networked culture and media. And I do think that the conversation has become a space where it's very trusted information, or at least not all explanatory journalism, I suppose, could be trusted information, but we always do. I was using the conversation as a teaching resource at the end of when I was teaching that class. Just in terms of the journalistic and ethical practice of it all, I think that the conversation has been a really good teaching resource. So that's like one way that has informed my work. My role with the project, the conversation project, was not necessarily a role of influencing the research direction whatsoever. I would say that I was a program manager, so I looked more at administrative and helping projects once the ideas and research programs had been developed. But I did have the opportunity to develop a research program for looking at news frames of e-health, or electronic health, virtual care, telehealth in news media. And so in that way, I think that doing a comparative study, looking at legacy media and explanatory journalism, and looking at the news frames that are used to discuss those topics, I think that's definitely at least helped my personal research as well, to understand kind of the information that the general public has about these types of services. So there's a back and forth for sure.
So talk to me a little bit more about that research. That sounds really interesting. Personal health device networks, their impact on healthcare services. Spotlight that for me a little bit.
For sure. Yeah, it's my passion. Actually, my dissertation is looking at specifically at virtual care service and the patient experience of virtual care services in Ontario. And in order to build context for that, working with XJO has actually really helped inform, I suppose, my understanding of how different countries are doing it, because you can learn a lot just from reading the news, right? So yeah, the project itself is looking at 4 different countries. So I'm looking at US, Australia, UK, and then Canada. And essentially what this project is doing is going ahead and pulling newspaper articles from all of those countries and comparing it to the conversation articles that are coming from those regional editions. Right now, we're not necessarily at the comparative stage in between explanatory journalism and legacy quite yet, because I'm still doing a regional comparison first. We built a corpus of 1 million words, so I think it was just under 2,000 news articles from the 4 different regions. Each region, so each country had the conversation articles and then also 2 legacy news outlets included. And we tried to kind of create a spectrum of those newspaper outlets. So maybe something that was politically a little more right or politically a little bit more left, or how those kind of, there's always ownership of these types of outlets is important to consider as well. So we had a very good spread of articles, I think. And yeah, we had 1 million words, and basically we're able to translate all of those into text files and then put them into a software that was able to look at some of the computational linguistics statistics. We're looking at, overall, how many times does this word appear, and when this word appears, what's frequently appearing beside that word. And so we're really, instead of trying to read 1 million of those words and use human computing abilities to understand what they're trying to say and what are frequent themes, we're trying to do that, have that same analysis and do it with computational methods. So, but yeah, we found some interesting stuff so far. So I guess, for example, like the Canadian news articles, they tend to look more at first-person narrative and discuss more first-person experience. In Australia, a lot of the discussion around these topics has to do with government regulation and what government ministers are doing about, giving access and allowing certain sectors to become virtual care sectors rather than in-person healthcare sectors. And I mean, in the States, you probably would have guessed it, but the discussion is always comes down to insurance at a certain point.
That's so interesting. I'm also a researcher, so I've worked with Nicole in the past, and we've done work with JRP, and we did a really similar basically project. The collection was like an aggregation of, I think, over 3,000 news articles from different like legacy organizations, as well as organizations like Huffington Post. And a lot of the same conclusions that we came to, like Canadians, or specifically Huffington Post, will use more first-person narratives. We also found that Canada uses more expert sources, which was really interesting. So I think my question for you is why do you think this work and the exploration of this work, as it relates to explanatory journalism, but also just standalone, why is it so important to media and academia as a whole?
So it's interesting that you say experts and who they're referencing in your research that came up. And that was one of the initial findings from this research as well that kind of cropped up, was the word said. If you look at the word said and you isolate that word and you kind of look at what is frequently found, before or after that word, it's usually a pronoun. So it's a he, a she, or maybe a title like a doctor, Mr., Mrs. All 4 of these regions, number one person who is quoted as said is he. So I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into that and looking at who is being quoted and who is being seen as experts, and if there are differences between explanatory journalism and legacy media, specifically with the topic of e-health, telemedicine, telecare, virtual care, which is a more recent term. Journalism has a lot of impact when it comes to discussing healthcare and ways of accessing healthcare for general public, and for potential, everyone's a potential patient, right? So reading about, I don't have to necessarily go to my doctor in the pandemic. Maybe I can do an online like doctor visit or something like that. That's obviously pertinent information, and it can affect not only patients but practitioners as well in terms of any sort of trends in care. You might read, as a practitioner, you might read about something that you'd never heard about, and that might be introduced into your practice.
And that was Hanako Smith on explanatory journalism and patient experiences of virtual healthcare. To learn more about Hanako's work and the XJO project, visit our website at ryerson.ca/explanatory-journalism.